Welcome to episode 7 of Startup Dudes. I'm Todd.
And I'm Bill. Welcome.
This is my dad, by the way, in case you didn't know.
We're going to have some fun today.
We're going to talk about something that a lot of people are interested in, which is once they have a concept they're getting ready to open and it's product based, how do we know what to put in the initial product assortment and sort of what goes into doing that? And I thought, what better person to ask than someone who's done this many, many times? So what would you do first, Bill, if you were asked to develop a product assortment for a retail store, either online or in person?
Good question. I think the best way for me to answer it is to actually put it in context of something that I did. But obviously, there's lots of different assortment planning contexts, that can range from like you said, Todd, from online stores to real stores to wholesale companies. There's all types of assortment planning. But I think if we take an example, I can go and give you a little bit more detail. So I think the context will be the opening of MGM Grand back in 1992. That was a pretty big prospect. It was going to be the largest hotel in the world. It was being billed that way, and it in fact was that way at the time.
It ended up being that way.
Yeah, and which was 5,000 rooms. It was a big resort, a mega resort, and it had a theme park attached to it at that time in the beginning, and also had a special events kind of special events center, convention center kind of thing called the MGM Grand Garden. So anyhow, I was vice president of retail on opening day, and I started 2 years before they opened. And the question that you have, Todd, is one of the questions that I had to answer. It was just me for almost 2 years. They wanted to be very careful with labor. So I didn't have a team, but I had done this before, at Disney.
And you did it at Disney.
At Disney and some other places. So I didn't need a big team as long as I had enough time. So they said, is 2 years enough time? I said, yeah, it's plenty.
How did you, I mean, they didn't tell you what to do. They pretty much gave you free reign, right? So, I mean, do you name the stores first and then you develop the product?
That's a really good question, but that also gets back to within the context of your original question. So, and I'll answer that. The first thing I did, first of all, I moved to Las Vegas. That's what prompted me to move there. And so I didn't know the city very well. I had to get acquainted with the city. So I knew that I needed to get out and see what my competition was going to be for these 20 stores that I was going to be in charge of. So that's probably the first pillar, if you will, or the first thing you need to do in terms of assortment planning is get out of the office.
What were you doing?
Today you can do it on the internet, but I also think you should do it live. And so I walked into, all the major hotel casinos on the strip, at that time, and I just walked the stores and I was taking notes. And I didn't have a computer, or an iPhone in those days back in '92. So had blank 3x5 cards, and just be doing like my little cheat sheet.
I'm sure they loved you.
Yeah,
probably loved you
doing
that
I said,
in
well,
their
I'm
stores.
just doing some Christmas shopping, or whatever. But
it's July, though.
What are you? Yeah. What are you doing? What are you doing?
What are you really doing?
So to get back to your second question about naming the stores, going through my competitors, the other hotel casinos in town, I would make a list of all their stores. Now, again, there was no internet in those days, so it would be on my 3x5 card. So I would list all the stores that were in this hotel casino, all the stores, and I would have a brief description. If the title of the store wasn't enough for me, I'd make a note or two as to what was in that store in general. And then when I got back to the office and I sat down with myself, I know kind of what the universe is in terms of my competitors and what stores they have. And it was pretty clear that the first store that I needed to plan for was a newsstand. And that ended up becoming the greatest sales per square foot of all of the stores. It's probably that way for every hotel
And then
casino.
that's like a convenience store, really.
Yeah, people forget their toothbrush and aspirin and all of that kind of stuff. So the newsstand, and you want to get the newsstand located. This is part of your answer in terms of the names of the stores and all that. You want to get it as close to the elevators as possible. So I found,
because you got to pass by it to get to your room. Right?
yeah, and that's exactly right. And you can come down to it easily and conveniently when you come down from your room. So I found a little space, I think it was about 700 square feet, right there in the elevator shaft. And so I said to the architects and the engineers, because I was 2 years, before opening, so I still had a chance to make some of those things happen. I said, I want that. And then the second store I knew I needed to have was kind of a lobby store where you check in, because that's where everybody goes. And where you choose those locations is really, really important. If you choose bad locations, you're gonna get hurt. You're gonna die.
We have topics regarding bad locations for future videos.
Yeah,
we have friends, clients, and
that'll be a future episode.
Even maybe some of our own projects that we early on.
So I knew that I needed a lobby store, and the MGM Grand. Remember, that was going to be the largest hotel casino in the world. So that lobby was pretty big, and I found about 7,000 square feet. Now it's almost arrogant, to ask for 7,000 square feet
for a store
as a retailer for the store. That's a big store, 7,000 square feet. But I said, I'd really like to have that. And they said, well, what would you do with it? I said, well, I'd turn it into an MGM Grand kind of department store. I said, okay.
It was a beautiful store. I remember that store. It was gorgeous. What was it called?
Well, that gets back to your names. I think you were talking about what the names would be. I named it after the hotel, called it MGM Grand and Company. Again, you're kind of riding the coattails of what's really important. And that became, you wouldn't be surprised, I'm sure, that was the biggest sales of any store in MGM Grand,
just gross,
anywhere on the property in terms of gross. Yeah, it was just ridiculous how much sales we did, how much the sales were.
Going back to you're in this competitor stores, you're writing stuff down. What are you writing down? You're writing the prices down?
Well, I want to find out what offers they're making, because every city's different, and Las Vegas is very different. Trying to take advantage of the history of merchants that were doing work before me in the city. Now, I'd done work before me too over at Disney, right? So, and that was one of the reasons they hired me, because they wanted to have a theme park with its own kinds of theme park stores. So they thought this Disney guy would be perfect, bring him in. So that's why they recruited me in there, was because of my Disney background. But the Disney brand name didn't hurt anyhow, even if they weren't going to do a theme park, right? I mean, it's a great brand name.
So, okay, so you're writing down prices, you're getting a sense of one of the questions that I'm sure a lot of people have on their minds is, how can we get ahead of the curve? How would you learn what the hot items are, maybe even a little bit before the market knew?
Okay, well, that kind of leads me to the second pillar, would be research. And that goes beyond just writing the stores down and what's in them. That's where you're getting into, which is going to lead into the assortment planning, and it's going to lead into the layout of the stores. So what I did was I made a list of the kinds of presentations, merchandise product presentations I think I needed to have. A lot of that was learned from my experience at Disney. Some of it was learned from what the competitors are doing, and then just your own common sense and your own merchandising background. I knew I needed a men's store. Now, do I want to lease it or do I want to operate it? Eventually, I decided I just want to lease it, because there's a lot of special knowledge and attention, and it's almost like the men's store is going to dominate the thinking of my division, which you don't want to do. So we also needed a women's store, because men and ladies come in, they don't have everything they need in the way of clothing, and it's a little bit more of a resort clothing, than you'd find back home in your city. And then there's other kinds of products, like jewelry and decorative gifts and toys and that sort of thing. You want to have some kind of thinking, some kind of strategy, for each one of those. So that was all done. I pretty much knew what I wanted to do everywhere, including the theme park, and that I really used my Disney background, Disney theme park background for that. I mean, I had a China store just like we had at Disney World, and I had a character store, just like we had at Disney World. So, and get back to your question, the senior management bought off. I mean, they know this guy's been, he knows how to do it. He's done it over and over and over. So my updates to them were very general, and I don't remember any instance where they said, no, don't do this store, do this store. Nobody ever did that. So, I mean, there was a lot of pressure on me. I needed to perform. And one of the things I did was to come in at 4 o'clock in the morning every day for 2 years. And I know that sounds a little bit crazy.
You get a lot done though between 4 and, or let's say you got in at 4:30, you get a lot done before anybody shows up.
Yeah, and then everybody likes to leave around 7, so it was probably what, 15-hour day. I know the chairman or the CEO at one point in time said, I heard there was a guy coming in at 4 every day, and I didn't believe it. So I drove in this morning in the parking lot, and there was a car there. And fortunately, he didn't say it was me, because everybody would have hated me.
Yeah, because then that was the new starting time.
Yeah, this guy's a jerk, What is he trying to prove, But I did that because I was feeling so much pressure. And first time I'd ever been in Las Vegas, and I had to learn a lot of, that. So I just figured out what I needed to do, and then I worked harder than everybody else. That was my goal. So we've gotten through the stores. The next thing I had to do was lay the stores out, and you start with a pencil, what they call a little bubble layout, and it's kind of a rough. You want to put a refrigerator over here. You want to put jewelry counter over here, so everything started with a bubble layout, and then I started to, I'm not an architect, but I'm a merchant, merchants can do this kind of stuff. And then I started to fine tune it a little bit, and then they allowed me to work with one of the, the architects. And then that was real fast. He said, I got it, so that became, kind of a fusion of the architect and me, but obviously the merchant's leading the way. You're not going to have a refrigerator.
Well, you're the customer too.
Yeah, you're not going to have a refrigerator there unless the merchant thinks you ought to have a refrigerator there. So, and then back to research again. So I would go back into all of my competitors, and then I start drilling down and making a list of specific products and specific suppliers. Turn the item over, and in half the time you can see the supplier there, And I'd say, I'm gonna take a look at this guy. So research. So what did you do over the 2-year period? You can kind of start to see it now. A lot of research. And today, of course, you can use it online to save you a lot of time, but I still think you want to do live and walk it, because you have a better feel.
One time you said that one of the greatest sources of intelligence was talking to sales guys that would come in and salespeople.
That's a good question, a very good question. I think that's part of the secret or part of the answer to your question as to how you create an assortment plan. Some buyers, we've been accused, I'm just saying generically about buyers, of being a little arrogant. We don't, we'll let you know what we need.
We're not taking that meeting.
Don't bother me.
Yeah.
Don't call us. I'm not going to
you.
return that call. And I've always been against that. I mean, if you say, what are you today, Bill, more than anything else, I would say I'm a salesman, I'm a presenter, I'm a deal maker. But 50% of my career, I was on the buying side, so I understand both sides. But I never thought it was right to have a salesman waiting, in the lobby for an unreasonable amount. I think it's rude and crude. and not returning phone calls. It's almost an epidemic today about not returning phone calls. I mean, when you get a phone call returned, especially when it's cold, good luck.
Good luck.
But I always made it a point to respect salesmen, and as a result, I got a lot of great ideas. I mean, I would say, okay, so what are your number one items around the country?
And you're jotting that down.
I'm jotting it down.
And sometimes they're probably bleeding for you with information. They don't even realize what they're doing, right?
Yeah, I mean,
Because you can take that idea and go to another
you could.
person.
You
or
could,
manufacturer.
sure, somebody with a better price, same kind of capability.
you're-
But they want to develop a
Right,
relationship
trying to
with you,
develop
so they're not
rapport.
going to hold back too much. But he might say, in the southeastern part of the United States, this is the number one item. I say, well, can you show it to me? That type of thing. So you're going to learn a lot if you're open to
taking the meeting.
talking to salesmen, even calling them and receiving them. Again, I had a 2-year period, right? So I had a lot of time to do that. And I was able to identify a lot of national trending product that you wouldn't get if you don't use that as a resource. So
it sounds like a lot of what you're talking about, Bill, is gathering information, doing the research, which I feel like a lot of people don't really do today. They jump to the end because it's no fun.
Research
is no fun,
research
right?
is no fun, but it's
everything.
If you say what's the most important thing, it's research. So I've become a really good researcher as a result of that. I think that's one of the things that sets me apart. Well, I want to touch on one more thing before we end the episode, and that's money, cost, margin. I wanted to hit a 70% standard margin, gross profit margin, and just so that we're calculating margin in the same way. Cost, say, is $10. Retail would be $30.30. 3.3 times retail would be 3.3 times cost. That's 70% gross margin. I wanted to have that as a standard, not that I never accepted anything less. If you're selling camera products, for example, which you would in a resort, you're not going to get 70% margin. Usually the entity that owns the brand gets the best margin. So if you're dealing with Nike, you're going to put some Nike in there. You're not going to get a 70% margin because you're going to be overpriced relative to everybody else at retail. You're not going to do that. So, but that's what that was my goal, was 70% margin, knowing that I was going to get some 45s and some 50s. And then every now and then I would grab an 80 or a 90% margin, which was almost ridiculous. That's if you buy something for 10 cents, you sell it for $1. That's a 90% margin. So, but anyhow, that was a very important part of the assortment planning, because that's the thing that kind of guides you. And fortunately, we ended up with that. We ended up with the highest margins in the industry.
And that was based on an average of the entire assortment. You got about 70%.
Yeah, I might have been, depending upon the month, because it calculates when you sell it through the cash register, right? So I might have been 67, 68,
Understood.
71 some months, but that gave me the honor, if you want to call it that, of having the highest margins in the industry. This kid that just came in from Las Vegas, who the hell is he?
Did Disney have 70% margins?
Yeah.
Is that kind of what they're?
Yeah. But their prices are.
Yeah, they're a little.
They're even. So it's easier to get it there than it is in a highly competitive environment like Las Vegas.
So it sounds like that really, even though you walked us through opening a real live store, brick and mortar type store, a lot of these concepts could work for any kind of a store or any kind of a product, whether it's, software, hard goods, services even, right? Because you still have to get a sense of what the market,
that's right,
is going to be able to bear. So, well, that's really interesting.
And I'll just say one more thing before we wind it up, Todd, and that is that after we opened, we were flawless when we opened that. It was our division had like no problems, but it was really funny because there was problems everywhere. I won't get into it. There's some really funny stories of opening the largest hotel in the world, but we were, and I think it goes back to the arriving at 4 in the morning.
Preparation.
Working, preparation, working really hard. But anyhow, last thing I wanted to tell you was, once we got open, then I continued with weekly, call them secret shopping if you want to, around the industry, around the city, going to a different hotel casino every week and looking at what they're doing. How are they changing? Do they have any new items? Are they, sometimes I'll just ask, is that a hot item? Or what's your hottest item in the store? And a lot of times I tell you. It's amazing what people will answer.
So you have a little budget set aside for doing that kind of work?
Yeah, well, it was just me walking around, so there was no hard cost associated with it. But that kept the assortment plan in line, smart,
Fresh.
And fresh. And so you don't start degrading after you've worked so hard for opening. That weekly, call them secret shopping.
Kind of after you're open, kind of we can relax now, but you never relaxed.
Never
sounds
relaxed.
like. Well, that's really interesting. Appreciate you taking us through that. So hopefully you found that to be useful and interesting. What I would love to be able to do is show you some photographs, because we have some photographs of some of these stores in the very early stages. So we are going to try to figure out how to do that, whether it be as sort of B-roll behind us or maybe even in the description area. So thanks for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you very much. Enjoy it.